Hello everyone and welcome to Fuse Room. I'm Alberto. In this video we're going to talk about the Overstayer M.A.S. or M.A.S. by Softube. Today is a great day. One of my favorite pieces of hardware has been ported to digital by the good folks at Softube. The Overstayer M.A.S. was born in Los Angeles. It sounds like Los Angeles. It even smells like Los Angeles if you're unfortunate enough to know what I mean. When I heard the news, I put on my Orange County Choppers shirt, cargo pants, pulled my socks as high as I could, and I headed into the closest Starbucks. I ordered the cheapest thing available, pretended I was writing some Hollywood script, but actually I was just charging my phone, because all of the sockets were used by my roommates. But not enough people know the Overstayer M.A.S, and it's one of the coolest hardware pieces for analog saturation. So let's dive into it because I'm partial to it. I really like this unit and I really like the plugin and how it sounds. Now let's take a look at how the plugin sounds because we're frustrated people who need to look at graphs, but seriously it's kind of useful and I kind of approve of this methodology before heading into audio examples. The main interface is two big knobs, input, output. So you drive the input and you compensate with the output. If you want to mix some kind of, saturated signal in, you have a mix knob, and that's pretty much the bulk of your interface. The meters underneath are very cool because you can see there's 0.1 till 0.7, 1.0, and then we go 3, 5, 7, 10. So there's a sort of like a zooming in into the very first decibel of saturation that the Overstayer generates, because it's particularly useful on mixes and masters as well. So you drive the input, you compensate the output, but there are a couple cool things that you can do on the plugin especially. So you can compensate automatically what the input does, which is extremely useful if you want to just, drive the input without having some sort of gain discrepancy. And before driving the input, you can decide whether you want to engage a high shelf, a low shelf, or a low cut, because Softube people like to say low cut, so I'm using that term. It's a 50 Hertz high pass, I just lied, with a bump that is usually able to make your low registry and kicks, and low extreme lows kind of ballsy, I would say. It's kind of a very rock-oriented high pass. Obviously, you can compensate the dry or not signal with the button to dry, so that when you're mixing the dry and wet signals, you don't get a discrepancy between the two. Afterwards, you can decide whether you want to have dual saturation. So it's a dual stage saturation where the transformers get added in series. And for this reason, you have a thicker, I would say, kind of sound. We're going to hear it in the examples. You can emphasize the second order harmonics, just to, give it more of a second order harmonics kind of saturation. And you can engage the emphasis. Now, the emphasis is, when on, by default, the sound of the M.A.S. or M.A.S. So emphasis on, you should start thinking about it as the default sort of sound. And in fact, if you do engage emphasis, you see that the classic M.A.S. green button lights up. Now, these buttons are not present in the original interface. It's a way for Softube to say that when classic M.A.S. is engaged, it's the unit sounding the closest to its original counterpart. But then they added 5. There are actually 5, yes. I can count up to that. These are custom programs that Softube developed, in conjunction with Overstayer. So you have low bandwidth, you have low presence, high presence, bass distortion, treble distortion. So these are cool colors that they wanted to add in. And all in all, this is it. It's a unit that you drive through the input. You choose whether or not you want to have these shelves or cuts, and then you decide what kind of saturation you want to impart. If you want dual series, kind of a heavier, thicker sort of tunnel through which the sound goes and kind of gets sort of built up. If you want more of a second order harmonics, or if you want the emphasis, which is, again, don't be fooled by the default behavior. Now, in harmonics land, you obviously can compensate the output, but most importantly, you drive the input and you see that the harmonics, go all over the place. They obviously change a little if you engage the filters, if you go with dual, second, but I think the best way to sort of see the saturation methodology of the Overstayer is through the Hammerstein, obviously. So you have a sweep that goes through the entire spectrum, and we see these lines emphasizing which kind of harmonic behavior is generated throughout the different frequencies. So, for example, yellow line is third order harmonic, and you can see that the third order harmonic is being emphasized past 1K, sort of. And kind of the same happens for the second order, but then when you go to fifth, or what is it, like fourth or even sixth, things are a little bit, less linear, obviously. In our first example, we're gonna dive into a mix that is a mixture of indie, punk, and rock. Teenager band, super cool stuff. Let's listen to this setting that I've dialed in without and then with, and let's comment afterwards. I really like what the Overstayer does, and I am partial to it, I know, and it's a very unique way of bringing rock mixes to life. I really like it. I fiddled with it, but I think dual emphasis mode, because that's the classic way of working with it, and all shelves in plus the low cut sounds great. Maybe 10, 9 is a little bit too much for a mix, but I think this 7, kind of this setting really works. And sometimes you don't have to have a lot of LEDs lighting up. It might be at 0.2, and it's making a world of difference. But you'll notice that this also works in the electronic department, because this is more of a, not an ambient tune, but it has a lot of deeper lows, and it's kind of a world electronica project. Let's try and hear what this does and find maybe, points that are similar to what we just heard in the punk rock. So before and after. I think the setting I had dialed in is really cool, with the second harmonic and emphasis as usual for classic M.A.S behavior, and high shelf and low cut for sure. The low shelf depends, but I just wanted to keep it in at first just to show you how even on a deep bass kind of mix with clean subs, you can still push, and you're not gonna get a very colored bass. You're gonna get some kind of moody, saturated, behavior, but it's still very clean. What I hear that is similar to the first mix is that this is really detangling itself. It's a term that I always use. It's kind of easier to understand. It's easier to translate to different speakers, and there's kind of a more detailed presentation. So a lot of the in-between low mids and mids are getting clean very specifically, very surgically in a way for being an analog unit. So in the third example, here I've gone with the extended version of the M.A.S. And here we have two filters, high pass and low pass, which are post the saturation, which I haven't used. They're also resonant if you want, and these are great for synthesizers, creative uses. And then you have bass, presence dB, 2 of them, and a treble dB. So what happens in the middle is that you can decide how much to overcharge or undercharge the bass, treble, and 2 areas of the mid frequencies. The knob itself, the black knob, represents how much you are pushing before the saturation, so that is gain pre. The outer dial with the black triangle is gain post. You usually have it compensated, like by default the compensation LEDs are lit, so when you move one clockwise, the other ring goes counterclockwise, for example, so it's always compensated. So this is a no mix bus print, and it's a safety print that I usually do. It's something that I do just for safety, so it's my mix without the mix bus. So nobody ever heard it, I haven't heard it as well, and it's darker, it doesn't have the transient, sort of like factor that I would like, but the Overstayer is bringing it back to sort of like being finished or sounding finished. So let's hear it without and then with. It sounds incredible. Now, my ears, your ears probably as well, were focusing more on the highs because saturation, high frequencies, something about the highs. But I just turned around and the depth of this mix is insane. This is something I really want from my soundtracks because of the environments the video games are getting played in. The developers, create these worlds in which players just lose themselves. And the music itself has to sound deep, has to give the player a feel for the vastity of the environment. And this saturation mechanism, I don't know how it does it, but it just creates depth instead of being incredibly focused on the highs, on the brittle, on the sand, on the rusty kind of effect. Last but not least, some blues rock mix. And I'm gonna go more in the extremes. We're gonna hear these settings that I've dialed in because they're pretty good, I think, but then I'm gonna just mess with it and try some parameters into the low bandwidth and the other stuff that Softube has added. So before and then after.
I won't be there when you will need me. We lost the place where we belong. I'm on my way to Mykonos. Love is nothing, we're gonna die. Oh, fast to find the Lord at night. Love is nothing, we're gonna die. Oh, fast to find the Lord at night. Love is nothing, we're gonna die. Oh, fast to find the Lord at night. Love is nothing, we're gonna die. Oh, fast to find the Lord at night.
I really like how the vocals become more detailed and easier to listen to and follow because that's where I would like my listeners to just, concentrate on, obviously. It makes the guitars be a little bit on the sides, and it kind of solves the kick. It's really interesting. It's a displacement of energy that still works, brings the mix to something else, but has that finishing factor. So, as usual, I hope these examples were useful to you, were in some way capable of transferring the idea of how the Overstayer M.A.S can really make an improvement, make that final 5% step forward on finished mixes, but it can work everywhere else. I know I'm partial. I really like this unit. I'm super happy. I'm gonna go back to the Starbucks because I think my phone is now charged. Thank you very much for watching. Ciao.